any questions from previous speakers also you can ask by sitting.
Okay. Thank you.
So get ready within 10 to 15 minutes. Immediately after the consultant paper, we'll have the podium presentation. Thank you. Madam, Madam Nisi Gupta will be leaving now. Can I call upon Dr. Deepak Ranjan Naik sir to please come and felicitate Madam and chair the next session. Sir, please sit and chair the next session. It will be just 2 more papers.
And respected chairperson, today I am going to talk about the papillary carcinoma, advanced stage of papillary carcinoma invading the laryngeal tree, and how to manage and what is the management option, what is the outcome. Actually, the laryngeal invasion by the papillary carcinoma, that means if you are dealing with a stage for T4A or T4B disease, that is invasion of the trachea, larynx, the thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, nerve is involved, esophagus is involved, that worsens the prognosis, because the most prognostic factor for the outcome of the papillary carcinoma is the extent of surgery, how much gross disease you have removed and how much you are keeping for the radioiodine ablation. That depends. And the extent of excision extends from save excision, only simply save out the tumor or go for a radical excision. This is a retrospective study we conducted from 2016 to 2020 to evaluate what is the outcome, because it is easy to resect the trachea, larynx, but how to reconstruct. Simultaneously, you have to see the morbidity you are producing and what is the quality of life, all the things matter. That's why we did the study to find out what is the outcome we are getting by doing the surgery, all the things. It was a retrospective study, and we got around 65 cases. Out of 185 cases of papillary carcinoma thyroid, 65 cases had laryngeal invasion, LTI, and out of this male female were 30 and 35, and all of them present with neck swelling. And one more thing is around 20 cases, 30% of cases present respiratory distress. Already trachea is compromised, the vocal cord is compromised, the interlunar growth, and that's why they present. And out of this, T4A was 60 cases, T4B was 5 cases. T4B is that means you can go for a R0 dissection, but still you can go for dissection and leaving out the some tumor for the radioactive iodine ablation. These are the way everybody knows about it, how to investigate a case of thyroid nodule, no need to discuss about it. And these are the pictures. You can see this is papillary carcinoma grossly involving the all the laryngeal framework, thyroid cartilage. Then this is the axial section, this is coronal section, and this patient we went forward and did a total thyroidectomy with neck dissection, central compartment dissection, along with the laryngectomy. This is the post-op picture of after laryngectomy. This is another case of line involvement. You can see this left side. This is the involvement of the left side, right side lamina of the thyroid cartilage. And here also you can see that is the corner section. Here also you can see, and here also, because this patient present with a hoarseness of voice and respiratory distress. And after that only we went ahead with an external biopsy, because endoscopy biopsy was negative, then also FNS was negative. We went ahead with the external biopsy. Then that came a papillary carcinoma. Then we did the total thyroidectomy, that central compartment dissection, and this patient also had a tumor or lymph node encircling the common carotid. So that R0 resection was not possible, and along with we excised the lamina of the right side of the thyroid cartilage, and post-op also you did a tracheostomy before surgery, and subsequently he received radiographic ablation, and all the whatever the tissue left behind around the carotid, that was responded very well to the radiographic ablation, and subsequently we could able to deconvert. Now this picture showing that the patient is very well converting the corking of the tube. This is another case involving you can see the pyrethroid sinus and the thyroid cartilage and the invading. We excise the part of the thyroid cartilage and part of the thyroid muscle, but we could able to preserve that mucosa of the pyrethroid sinus, so that there is not a through and through defect. And this, whatever after excision, there was no through and through defect. This is a tracheal invasion. Actually, CT scan there are various methods to know, but many times CT picture may be little scaring, but during surgery may be able to take out the tumor. But I think what you are finding on table, that is the best answer, whether you are going to preserve the trachea or going for a tracheal dissection, anastomosis, or whatever extra procedure you want to do. The same patient, we find the tracheal rings very much invaded by the tumor. We went ahead with the tumor, whatever surgery done for the papillary thoracic central compartment and PA. Otherwise, we went ahead with the tracheal resection and along with the anastomosis. We did a primary anastomosis. Same excision. This is after same excision. You can see that the trachea and both side nerve. This is same excision done. Our cases, all patients are with total thyroidectomy, central compartment dissection, along with the unilateral, lateral, like 20 cases, bilateral 15 cases. And you can see this diagram showing that BS triangle. What is described in the textbook is the decongestion nerve, this is the inferior thyroid artery, and this is a common carotid that forms the triangle. Won't play, eh? The video not playing here. No. Alright. But it's actually the textbook for the PG. This is the triangle. Better always you expose the carotid and the trachea. And carotid, then locate the infrathyroid pedicule. Then around that you will find the medial wall is formed, medial side is the formed by the nerve, and around this structure you will find the inferior parathyroid. Best landmark is in the gauge tumor. You can go lateral approach with the carotid laterally and trachea medially. And in between carotid trachea short, find out to locate the pedicule, nerve 100% will be there. This is again another picture showing that the superior pedicule, you can see that the suprachiasmatic artery, and you can see the external branch of the supralaryngeal nerve supplying the cricoid muscle. This is the pattern of trachea. In maximum cases, you see that around 35 cases where trachea is involved, and trachea cricoid in 20 cases, and thyroid lamella affected 12 cases, and both the tracheal femur is involved in 5 cases. There is interluminal extension in the 5 cases. Management, same excision, 54 cases, tracheal resection another 4 cases, resection of thyroid lamina 5 cases, total laryngectomy 2 cases. These are histopathology type. Post all the patients received radioiodine ablation and along with the L-tyrosine tyrosine suppression therapy, and we assess the post-operative response to radioiodine ablation. The excellent response in 50 cases, biochemical incomplete in 5 cases, structural incomplete in 5 cases. And there was during this period that one patient died because there was a recurrence in the long metastasis, local recurrence, and he did not receive the radioiodine ablation because of the patient problem, that logistic arrangement and patient attendant are not willing. The radioiodine scan is very useful after surgery. You have to see, look at how much tissue is there or other present to systemic metastasis, and then you can go ahead with the radioiodine therapy or ablation. Discussion the extensive surgery is the mainstay of the therapy, but you have to balance between the cost and benefit, because excision of the recurrent region, nerve, trachea, larynx, that produces morbidity and the quality of life decreases. That's why you have to balance both the what you are achieving and what life or quality of life you are giving to the patient. That's why, because you can go for a conservative. How to decide? You have to decide if there is the tumor is invading into the cartilages or going interluminally, then that cases may require excision. You can go for a laryngeal resection or excision of the cartilage. If there is only superficial pericardium is affected or partly very minimal cartilage invasion is there, you can go for a radioiodine, that can go for same excision, relying upon the post-operative treatment by the radioiodine ablation. Already I have told how to decide whether go for a radical excision if cartilage is involved or that the interluminal extension is there. Same thing, there is a classical system. Since staging for a tracheal invasion, that 4 stages are there. Stage 1, stage 2. Stage 1 is only the outer pericardium is involved, and stage 2 is the very minimal invasion of tracheal cartilage. Stage 1, stage 2 can be managed by safe excision. If going into through the tracheal rings, and the stage 4 is the interluminal growth. This stage 3 and stage 4 will require a radical excision. That means we have two weapons to deal, to deal with the public and thyroid. One is the surgery, second is radioiodine ablation, third is the thyroxine suppression. And you have to balance between the extent of surgery and what is the benefit patient is getting. Conclusion: always you have a balance between the extensive radical surgery versus safe excision with post-operative radioiodine therapy, and this safe excision rely upon the post-operative radioiodine ablation therapy, and tracheal dissection, total or partial laryngectomy required in cases with interluminal involvement or gross cartilage erosion. Otherwise, the outer pericardium is involved or very minimal or partly cartilage involved, you can go for safe excision relying upon the post-operative radioiodine ablation therapy. Thank you.
I would request the postgraduates, those who have podium presentation, to come and upload their papers here as soon as possible. I mean now, so that as soon as we finish this, we can start. It will be going on simultaneously. The consultant paper will go on. You just have to.
Only one paper is left, madam. Only one is left.
Whatever. So you load your PPTs here.
Very good morning to everyone. I'm Dr. Swagata Chakravarti. I'll be talking about purely endoscopic management of paranasal sinus malignancies, our institutional experience. Coming to the introduction, transnasal endoscopic surgery has revolutionized the management of inflammatory condition of the nose and paranasal sinus. However, since 1990s, it is being used. However, since the 1990s, it has been used for the management of sinonasal malignancies as well. Sinonasal malignancies are rare, but it is the treatment of this condition is challenging due to the close vicinity of important structures like skull base, orbit, cranial nerves, and great vessels. The traditional procedures which is employed in sinonasal malignancies are lateral rhinotomy, maxillary swing approach, facial declubbing, and craniofacial dissection. This is a picture of iliac sinus malignancy which was being treated with lateral rhinotomy approach, and the medial canthal defect was treated with managed with pyramidal flap. This is a photo of midfacial declubbing approach. In our study, it was conducted as a retrospective study. It was a series of 18 cases which was being conducted since 2014 to 2019, and the inclusion criteria was all the patients who underwent purely endoscopic surgeries. Pathologies were osteochondromyxoma, inverted papilloma with synchronous malignancy, squamous cell carcinoma of ethmoids, adenocarcinoma, undifferentiated ethmoidal carcinoma, olfactory neuroblastoma, angiosarcoma, renal cell carcinoma with metastasis to ethmoid sinus, inferior turbinate carcinoma, acinic cell carcinoma, and ameloblastic carcinoma, and rhabdomyosarcoma. This is a picture of osteochondromyxoma, which is involving the right orbit, and it's abutting to the left orbit as well. This is a picture of inverted papilloma with synchronous malignancy with intrathelial extension, and recurrent squamous cell carcinoma of ethmoid sinus. And this is the operated picture, poster picture of inferior turbinate squamous cell carcinoma. And this is the picture of rhabdomyosarcoma with intratemporal fossa extension. The age range of the patient was 16 to 62 years, mean age was 46 years, and average hospital stay was 5 to 6 days. Most of the patients, majority of the patients were male, and average blood loss was 200 to 1200 ml, and majority of the patients had 800 to 1000 ml of blood loss. After the surgery, adjunctive RT was employed in 13 patients, and chemotherapy was received by 4 patients. And after 2 years, the survival rate was 94.45%. Complications, we had, most of the patient has facial numbness and followed by anosmia. Retroorbital hematoma was there in one patient due to injury to the anterior ethmoidal artery. CSF leak, it is a sequel rather than a complication because of the close vicinity of the disease of the cerebellum plate. Meningitis, temporary ophthalmoplegia was there in a patient. There was blindness due to ischemic injury to the optic nerve, and death happened in one patient after in the POD tool due to the intracranial hemorrhage. In discussion, I would like to say preoperative imaging is very important. Use of intraoperative navigation system, piecemeal removal of the tumor, and intrafrozen section drilling and preservation of nasolacrimal duct are very important. Positive margin doesn't mean negative outcome because we always have a backup of chemotherapy and radiotherapy. The CSF leak is higher compared and it will be there if because the disease is very near to the piriform plate. And in contraindication for endoscopic approach are skin and subcutaneous tissue involvement, maxillary sinus, anterolateral wall bone erosion, palatal erosion, frontal sinus anterior table erosion, and sphenoid sinus lateral inversion. In these cases, we can't go for pure endoscopic management. We will need combined approach or open approach. In conclusion, I would like to say, endoscopic approach helps to reduce blood loss, hospital stay, and complication in comparison to external approaches. The margin negative rates are similar to traditional approaches. A subset of malignant pathologies can be planned for endoscopic management with adequate preoperative planning and mandatory close-up post-operative follow-up. For extensive lesions, external approach may hold upper hand, but the mobility should be acceptable. Endoscopic approach might provide a better quality of life in such cases. These are my references. Thank you.
Any question from the audience? Just one comment at the commercial carcinoma should be getting endoscopic evaluation more because what happened, commercial carcinoma is very, very careful while dealing with endoscopic approach. You have to plan whether the endoscopic approach is feasible, or you have to combine with endoscopic approach, or you have to go purely with neck. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
That concludes the consultant paper presentation. Sir, please wait, sir. I would like to invite Professor Dr. Subrat Kumar Behera to felicitate Professor Deepak Ranjan Naik, sir.
Yes, and here names. Arunita and Dr. Ashutosh Prasad, Dr. Swasti and Ansel Swama from AIMS, Dr. Manisha and Vaishali from Haida. There are 5 participants.
To felicitate our participant who in consultant talk who have actively presented nice paper. So we want to felicitate by Professor Rajendra Padile.
Dr. Swagata Chakravarti ma'am.
प्रदीप्त कुमार। डॉक्टर रविंद्र कुमार खटुआ, ENT कंसल्टेंट। डॉक्टर सब्यसाची पति। डॉक्टर प्रदीप प्रधान। डॉक्टर दिलीप कुमार सामंत। With thanks from the core of our heart, I would like to request Dr. S.K. Agrawal to please come up on the stage, and he will be felicitated by Professor Rudra Biswal sir. Sir, please.
It is a pleasure on our part to felicitate him for this valuable education, sir.
We didn't know that Sar is also a very good singer that we saw last night. Could not be present here, Dr. Saroj Raj sir, that we could plan to make this conference here at Baleshwar. Thank you, sir. Thanks again. Sanjit Mishra.
तापर कौन सा है अपन को तापर कोई तापर रखवी कि ना तो कोई आवाज करना
So very good morning to all of you for paper presentation, PG paper presentation, and it was really a very tough time to decide whom to select for this podium presentation. There was a breakneck competition among all the participants almost. So finally someone has to be selected, and the judges selected the 4 names for the podium presentation, out of which 3 will be selected as first, second and third winners. So you already know the names of the 4 selected candidates. The first I will request Ms. Deepali Mahapatra from Bimsar Burla to present her paper. And before that, I must say that please stick to your time. You should finish your presentation within 5 minutes, and for question and answer session there will be 2 minutes. So if you exceed your time, then it will carry negative marking. So.
Today I am here to present a paper on the comparative study of clarithromycin and amoxiclav for the treatment of chronic rhinosinusitis. Chronic rhinosinusitis is defined as persistent inflammation of the mucosa of the nasal and the paranasal sinuses for a period of more than 12 weeks. Its prevalence is as high as 15%, and it occurs due to any changes in anatomical obstruction or due to dysfunction in the mucociliary clearance, leading to retention of the mucus in the paranasal sinuses, leading to decrease in the ventilation of the sinuses, leading to decrease in the pH, which provides a very good platform for the bacteria to flourish. The clinical symptoms associated with it are the mucopurulent nasal discharge, postnasal drip, headache, facial pain, cough, etc. CT scan is being advised in these patients to know the normal anatomy as well as to rule out the pathology such as the sinus opacity, air fluid level, and the mucosal swelling. Treatment is being aimed at reducing the mucosal inflammation and to reduce the bacterial load. So usually we give topical nasal steroids, nasal irrigation, mucolytic agents, antihistaminic steam inhalation in this patients along with antibiotics to reduce the bacterial load and to maximize the anti-inflammatory effect. Now coming to this antibiotic group, we usually prescribe clarithromycin as one of the drugs which belongs to macrolide group of antibiotics and is given at a dosage of around 250 to 500 mg 12 hourly, acts by inhibiting the protein synthesis and interleukin 8 inhibitor. Now, amoxiclav is also another group of drug which belongs to penicillin group and has beta-lactamase inhibiting property and acts by inhibiting the cell wall synthesis, given at a dosage of around 625 mg 8 hourly. Now, the aim of the study is to compare the efficacy of clarithromycin and amoxiclav in the treatment of chronic rhinosinusitis, and the objective of the study is to evaluate the clinical and the CT scan findings in the pre- and post-treatment with clarithromycin and amoxiclav in chronic rhinosinusitis. This study has been conducted in our college and 60 patients were taken who were clinically and radiologically diagnosed with chronic rhinosinusitis without polyformation. Now coming to the inclusion criteria, the patients who were taken were between the age of 15 to 60 years and at least one of the CT scan finding was mandatory, that was either sinus opacity or air fluid level or mucosal thickening, and exclusion criteria included any history of drug allergy to any of these drugs, pregnancy, lactation, and the patients with nasal septal deviation or concal hypertrophy or the patients with chronic rhinosinusitis who presented with polyp. Now, CT scan was being advised in the patients who were clinically being diagnosed, and the remission in mucosal swelling was described by the remission becoming less than 3 mm and remission of sinus opacity was described by decrease or disappearance of the opacity. Those 60 people were divided into 2 groups, each containing 30, and one group was prescribed clarithromycin 500 mg twice daily, and another group was prescribed amoxiclav 625 mg twice daily. And they were clinically being assessed at 21, 28, 40 to 56 days, and a CT scan was being repeated after 8 weeks of therapy, and the final data was being analyzed. Now coming to the observation table, we can see there are 2 groups of patients, 30 people each. The percentage of male and female in each group with the average age and weight. Now this is a slide showing the clinical improvement after taking clarithromycin. There is a very good improvement in the nasal condition for facial pain, then headache and so on. Now coming to the slide, this is improvement that we see after giving amoxiclav in these patients. Here we also see there is a very good improvement in nasal congestion followed by facial pain, then rhinorrhea and so on. So while comparing these two slides, we can see the clinical symptoms are being relieved about in equal percentage of patients after treating with both these drugs. Now coming to the slide, the CT scan finding has been improved very significantly in the clarithromycin treated patients as compared to the amoxiclav group. So coming to the discussion, clarithromycin and amoxiclav after being given for 3 weeks gave nearly equal clinical response. But the CT scan findings have a better improvement in case of clarithromycin treated drugs. Gottfried also did a similar kind of study and his findings were in accordance with ours. So coming to the conclusion, clarithromycin and amoxiclav have similar efficacious treatment of chronic rhinosinusitis, but as clarithromycin shows more improvement as per the radiological signs, it reduces the chance of future polyp formation. Thank you.
Why do you choose these antibiotics? Clarithromycin and amoxiclav. Why not other antibiotics?
So other antibiotics that are being prescribed, other antibiotics that we usually prescribe belong to ofloxacin group of drugs and also clindamycin, some clindamycin.
My question is, what made you choose these two group of antibiotics?
So usually in our clinical practice we prescribe these drugs, so I choose those two for the.
Question is, on what basis you have chosen this two?
Yeah. On what basis? Any protocol you are following or any recommendation or guideline?
Normally what you do is depending on the what kind of organisms most commonly seen and what drug is sensitive to the antibiotic.
Yes, sir.
Here on what basis you have chosen this one?
So usually in these patients we didn't do any kind of microbiological study. So as a broad spectrum antibiotic, we use these two drugs.
You cannot choose like that, na? So normally what you see, as per your like in the say tonsillar infection, the most common species of organism found is Streptococcus. Okay. Other organisms are very rare. So Streptococcus like gram positive Streptococcus, what drug you have to use, and the drug you have to use, and you are here on what basis?
So usually in case of chronic rhinosinusitis patient, Streptococcus, Moraxella, Haemophilus, all these are very common organisms, but Staphylococcus aureus has been found to be.
Pediatric or adult?
Sir?
Pediatric group or adult?
So it's adult group. We have taken 15 to 60 years patient.
Moraxella is not very common in adults.
So Staphylococcus aureus.
Staphylococcus you don't find in nose. You find in skin, external, yes.
It's a recommendation by guideline. You know that or not? What is the basis of CT scan you conducted, pre and post?
Sir, it has been done according to the Lund-Mackey scoring system.
Yeah.
So it is having 0, 1, 2 scoring system depending on the absence of any opacity, partial opacification and the complete opacification of the sinuses.
No. When do you first advise the CT scan?
So when the patient initially came to us and clinically diagnosed it to be a chronic rhinosinusitis patient, at that time we advised the patient to undergo the CT scan. Then we gave the treatment. After 8 weeks, the treatment has been done. Then we went for the next CT scan.
How many weeks of medical treatment then you go for post?
Sir, it was being given for 3 weeks, at least for 3 weeks for the treatment.
You just told 8 weeks?
But CT scan was being repeated after 8 weeks. But the medication was being given at least for 3 weeks.
This is chronic sinusitis or acute sinusitis?
It is chronic rhinosinusitis.
Chronic sinusitis, you think that antibiotic help?
Sir, actually in 0.5 to 2% of the cases it's actually due to the bacteria, but other causes are viral. So when the period exceeds more than 10 days, so we usually prescribe the antibiotics to have a very better effect. So That's why I answered.
So you say that first you do a CT, then categorize it,
Yes, sir.
then give treatment for 3 weeks, then wait for another 5 weeks, then you do the CT scan for follow-up.
Yes, sir.
That's the
Yes.
study you have done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, which is Ms. Sudipta Raut from High Tech Medical College. Third participant, Aswathi KV from AIMS Bhubaneswar. Please be prepared. Please come to the first row so that you can come immediately. From SCV Medical College. Please be seated in the first row.
Good morning, everyone. Myself Dr. Sudipta Raut. Today I am here to present you on topic auditory acuity in patient with type 2 DA. Diabetes mellitus is a metabolic disorder due to relative or absolute lack of insulin resulting in elevated blood sugar level associated with long-term vascular and neurological changes. It affects all the system, including hearing also. Effect of diabetes mellitus on hearing is known since 1857 when Jared saw hearing loss in patients with incipient diabetic coma. The typical hearing loss in diabetes is progressive bilateral sensory hearing loss affecting higher frequencies. Similar type of hearing impairment is found in presbycusis. In type 2 DM, the age group is 30 to 50 cannot be ignored. Hence, an attempt was made to assess the increased prevalence of subclinical hearing loss in early onset age group. Lassie et al. In 2003 found that the mean hearing threshold in patients with diabetes less than 10 years duration were far better than those more than 10 years. And HbA1c is a good indicator for diabetes control. In my study, I have included 100 patients with type 2 DM randomly from OPD basis. Those who are waiting for participation and informed consent was taken in their own language. In my inclusion criteria, no patient with type 2 DM, age group 31 to 55, those willing to undergo investigation, all the participants fulfilling the inclusion criteria, so go for ENT examination, A60, HbA1c level for glycemic control and hearing test as pure audiometry. In my exclusion criteria, I am excluding those patients who are conductive hearing loss, mixed hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss, other than type 2 DM like trauma due to head injury, congenital, familial or occupational causes, and those patients not willing for undergo investigation. In my result, out of 100 patients, there are 60 patients having SNHL, so the prevalence rate is 60%. The patients are divided into 3 groups. That is group A between 31 to 38 years, group B 39 to 40, and in group C 47 to 55 years. In group A, the prevalence rate is 43%, in group B 57 and in group C 71%. 62 males and 32 females are taken, out of which the sensory neural hearing loss is found in C, 40 male and 20 female. The degree of hearing loss in type 2 DM are classified in groups slight, mild, moderate and severe. In slight, the hearing loss is 16 to 25, mild 26 to 40, moderate 41 to 55, and in severe 56 to 70. It was the pressure study followed ASA classification of hearing loss. In my in this table, the hearing loss hearing loss is classified. The number of 28 patients are taken. 28 out of which the prevalence slight hearing loss prevalence is 47 in mild, 37 in moderate, 70, and according to 62 male, the prevalence rate is 64% in male and 52% in female. The duration of diabetes, like 36 patients having duration 7 years, the prevalence rate is 41, 43 patient duration 40, prevalence rate is 67, and participant 21, duration of disease is 21, the prevalence rate is 67. SNHL associated glycated hemoglobin, that is HbA1c level 6 to 8, the prevalence rate is 45. For more than 8, the prevalence rate is 79. In my discussion, most of the previous studies show association of SNHL with diabetes. The present study also supports association SNHL with diabetes. The prevalence rate is 66. Fedman et al. Showed 55% incidence of SNHL with type 2 DM. This should explain the microangiopathy of vessel to inner ear as proposed by Kapkalapudi et al. The duration of illness, the degree of hyperglycemia, and the HbA1c level are most important determining for auditory acuity. So lack of glycemic control, so positive correlation. So in my conclusion, this disorder which was manifesting older year of life now manifesting earlier year of life. So it is advisable to screen SNHL in all the patients. It is mandatory for necessary follow-up to be done regularly. These are my references. Thank you. And HbA1c level?
Curtain audiometry means have you done only the regular curtain audiometry, standard curtain audiometry, or also high frequency audiometry?
Sir, pure tone audiometry was taken.
Standard or high frequency?
Sir, standard.
Any role for high frequency audiometry?
Yes, sir.
What are the mode of presentation for the patient?
Sir, those patients are having known patient of type 2 DM with any type of complaint for coming over ENT OPD. I am taking for study.
How many of them have tinnitus?
Sir, mainly type 2 DM presented with tinnitus, but
Because sometimes the tinnitus may be present. You find a standard audiogram doesn't show much.
so masking, sir, in pure tone audiometry, we for rule out tinnitus, we do masking.
Is there any specific reason why you kept the upper age limit at 55?
Sir, to exclude presbycusis. As both presbycusis and in type 2 DM, the similar type of audiometry. Sir?
Is it that high frequency loss or a low frequency?
Sir, high frequency loss.
Because you want to exclude presbycusis. What is the reason to exclude?
Sir, mainly presbycusis start at the end of.
Juvenile diabetes, right? Why you have experienced juvenile?
Sir, mainly diabetes is common in nowadays. Diabetes is common in middle age group. So I am taking the age group 31 to 55.
Diabetes, juvenile patient also.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Why is that not included there?
No, what is the logic behind excluding those patients? That's what I want to know. What is the logic behind?
Sir, nowadays middle age group is more common for type 2.
Diabetes, young people are more common.
Yes.
So why did you exclude a large chunk of subject?
Sir, in juvenile case, we have other. No, sir, no, sir. Sorry, sir.
And how do you assess the glycemic control?
Sir, HbA1c level. Sir, between 6 to 8, there is poor glycemic control, and more than 8, that is poorly glycemic control. Poorly managed glycemic control, sir.
You didn't do any fasting 50?
Yes, sir.
You didn't do?
Fasting PPBs also do. HbA1c level is the most hemoglobin level in next 3 months. Blood sugar level in 3 months ruled out for HbA1c.
What were the basics of physiology? The duration of the diabetes correlated with the degree of deafness.
Sir, as the duration of disease increases, the hearing loss is also, the prevalence rate of hearing loss is also increases.
So did you find out how many of your patients, those who have diabetes mellitus at that age, were also juvenile diabetic? This means they are having diabetes in childhood, and what was the influence in this case? Some of your patients, those who are diabetic, they may be having juvenile diabetes. So, how many of them are juvenile diabetic, and what is the status of their health? So, you must have taken a history, na? How long the patient is diabetic, non-diabetic? Somebody may be juvenile, and somebody adult onset diabetic. Did you find any correlation in the hearing? It's important, na? If you have taken the juvenile, then the group would have not been excluded because you were asked for the history.
It's the duration of the disease and its correlation with hearing loss. Did you do that? And suppose a patient is diabetic when he was 20. Now he presented you at 31. Now he is included in the study. But he gives a history of 11 years of suffering. So did you include that in the study? Or you took only fresh cases?
No, sir. Duration of disease, I will take it. During 51 to 20